evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Tuesday. Let's light up the darkness. Whoops. My computer is being stubborn. I'm not sure why. It's very annoying. If I open a new tab, this is how I welcome everybody who's watching the show right now. Let's see if that will work. Okay, there we go. So close that one. Who's in the house? Melissa in Great Neck, Paul in the Great Northwest, Bill in Mid-Missouri, Guy in Ohio, Shandor in the Bronx, Bella in Florida. Paula's listening to you. Joe in the Inland Empire, Sharon in New Jersey, Lorraine in Texas, Karen in Northern California, Yehudit, so glad you're here, in South Carolina, Lucy in Minnesota, Carla in Brazil, and Yisrael from Philly, Aoife in Florida, Marjorie in Georgia, Ella and Chaim in Florida. Welcome, everybody. Today's episode of AT Daily is dedicated by our own Yehudit Silva. Beautiful dedication in honor of Nina and Sal for their dedication on the daily shears of Daf Yomi and being our Hevruta, our learning partner for both Jews and allies. So beautiful, Yehudit. Thank you so much for enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. May you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings, and we say Amen. Okay. Oh boy. I want to do a shofar blast for you, but my regular shofar's in the house. My lips have been so uncooperative this month, and this is my old shofar. Harder to blow. I'll do my best. Let's see if I can get it. A little higher pitched than the other one. All right, that one's for you, Yehudit. All right, doing a double daf today, 2 short pages. It should still be a relatively short class. Where am I? Here we go. Our pages today are 79 and 80 here in Tractate Bava Basra, 23rd volume of the Talmud, working our way through chapter 5 today, continuing our discussion of Mishnah number 4 that we opened yesterday. And we're going to complete that and open Mishnah number 5. The Mishnah teaches, one who sold a dunghill has sold its manure, right? So the dunghill is the place where this natural fertilizer is stored. And if there actually is manure piled up there, it would seem that it is sold along with the dunghill. And one who sold a cistern has sold its water. So we learned in a Mishnah elsewhere, Tractate Meila, which is about misuse of consecrated property, that with regard to any item that is fit to be sacrificed on the altar, but is not fit for temple maintenance, or it is fit for temple maintenance, but not for the altar. So for example, a donkey is something that you could, consecrate it and really consecrate its value as a gift to the temple, but it would not be fit for the altar because that's not a kosher animal. It's not one fit for slaughter and being brought as a sacrifice on the altar. On the other hand, what is an animal that is fit for the altar but not for maintenance? Stay tuned. Okay, so where are items that are fit neither for the altar nor for the temple maintenance in their current state, and so therefore they are slated to be sold with the profit used for the benefit of the temple. In all these cases, if one consecrates these items and then derives benefit from them or their contents for a non-sacred purpose, he thereby is liable for misuse of consecrated property and is obligated to bring an offering as an atonement. Now, the reason we're talking about this is because we said if one sells a dunghill, right, the place where manure is stored, or a cistern, that he has sold the dung or the manure with the dunghill and the water that's currently in the cistern along with the cistern. But that isn't necessarily so. You might say, well, I'm selling you a cistern, right, which is a hole dug in the ground and lined with something that makes it waterproof. Okay, I'm going to sell you this cistern, but first I'm going to remove my water that's in it. I'm going to take that water, I don't know, in storage containers and take it somewhere else. So I'm selling you the cistern does not automatically imply that I'm selling you the water that's in it. And of course, we could agree, you know, as a buyer and seller, we should have stated what's included and what's not. But again, all these Mishnahs that we're learning is where the buyer and seller didn't specify. And now we're trying to understand, according to the incomplete language that they used, what really was sold and what was not sold. So now we're going to look at the law of consecration and ask, well, if I consecrate a cistern, does the water go along with it? And now it has become consecrated water that I cannot make personal use of? Or do we just say that the cistern is consecrated but the water is not? That's the kind of basic approach of what we're doing here. So let's continue. So how so? One who consecrated a cistern filled with water, dunghills filled with manure, a dovecote filled with doves, a field that is filled with plants, or a tree bearing fruit, and subsequently derived benefit from them or their contents, is liable for misuse of consecrated property. In other words, if you added more water to store in this cistern, which previously you consecrated, so now it no longer belongs to you, right? It belongs to the holy temple. It belongs to God, as it were. You can redeem it by making that contribution to the temple, but in the meantime, it belongs to the temple. So the cistern belongs to the temple. You can't make use of it. What about the water that's already in it at the time that you consecrated it? Sounds like it became consecrated too. And likewise, if I consecrate my dovecote and there's doves in it at the time that I consecrate it, sounds like, at least according to this view, both the dovecote and the doves that are in it are consecrated. But with regard to one who consecrated a cistern and later filled it with water, or he consecrated a dunghill and later he filled it with manure, or a dovecote and later he filled it with doves, a tree and later it bore fruit, or a field and later it became filled with plants, if he derives benefit from them, the dovecote, the field, the cistern, the dunghill, he is liable for misuse of consecrated property, meila. But he is not liable for misuse of consecrated property if he derives benefit from those contents. Right? In other words, if I add water to the cistern that was consecrated, and then I take that water out, okay, I committed meila in terms of I used the cistern, which was consecrated, and I should have been using it for my personal benefit. But it's not a separate misdeed when I use that water, because that water was not consecrated. It was added later to a consecrated cistern, but that doesn't mean that that water became consecrated. It was added later after the cistern was consecrated. So I shouldn't have used the cistern, but I did not thereby consecrate the water when I added it to the cistern. And this is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yosei says, with regard to one who consecrated a field or a tree, he is liable for misuse of consecrated property if he derives benefit from them or that which grows from them, because they are growths of consecrated property. So it seems like Rabbi Yosei is telling us, okay, he would agree in the cistern if you consecrated it and later you added water, so you shouldn't have made personal use of the cistern, but the water did not become consecrated. On the other hand, if you consecrated a tree in winter, and then in that spring it grew fruit, and then you took the fruit, right? So you would be misuse of consecrated property because you took something from that tree, and misuse of consecrated property if you ate that fruit. because that fruit is consecrated, according to Rabbi Yosef, as the growth of a consecrated tree. The tree and what grows after it would both be consecrated. Now, it is taught in a Baraisa that Rebbe said the statement of Rabbi Yehuda appears to be correct in the case of a cistern and a dovecote, i.e., if one consecrated an empty cistern or a dovecote, the water or doves that later were used to fill it do not become consecrated. So Rebbe agrees with that. And the statement of Rabbi Yosef appears to be correct in the cases of a field and a tree. So the Gemara asks, what is the meaning of this statement of Rebbe? Granted, when he says that the statement of Rabbi Yehuda appears to be correct in the cases of a cistern and a dovecote, by inference, this means that Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with Rabbi Yosef in the cases of a field and a tree. And Rabbi Yehuda does explicitly disagree in those cases. But when Rebbe says that the statement of Rabbi Yosef appears to be correct in the cases of a field and a tree, this indicates by inference that Rabbi Yosef disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda in the cases of a cistern and a dovecote, but Rabbi Yosef stated his opinion only in the cases of a field and a tree, as only plants and fruit grow directly from consecrated property, and this reasoning is not relevant to the case of a cistern or a dovecote. Rabbi Yosef didn't say that Rabbi Yehuda is right or wrong with respect to the dovecote and the cistern. He's only saying that, well, with respect to things that grow naturally, like the fruit of a tree, that would be an outgrowth of a consecrated tree. Therefore, that fruit is also consecrated. But we don't learn out from that Rabbi Yosef would think that if you added doves to a dovecote or manure to a dunghill, that they became consecrated. He didn't speak to that. Right. So, and if you would say that Rabbi Yosef stated his opinion in accordance with the statement of Rabbi Yehuda, whereas he himself holds that even the items found in a dovecote or a cistern are consecrated, this also is difficult. But isn't it taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Yosef said, I do not see the statement of Rabbi Yehuda as correct in the cases of a field and a tree, because the plants and the fruit are the growths of consecrated property. Infer from here that it is in the cases of a field and a tree that Rabbi Yosef does not see and accept the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, but in the cases of a cistern and a dovecote, he does see and accept Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. And the Gemara answers that this is what Rebbe is saying. The statement of Rabbi Yehuda appears to Rabbi Yosef to be correct in the cases of a cistern and a dovecote. In other words, Rebbe is saying that even Rabbi Yosef disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda only in the cases of a field and a tree, but in the cases of a cistern and a dovecote, he concedes to him that the prohibition against misuse of consecrated property does not apply to items that were added afterward, later, after the item had been consecrated, and which were not present at the time of the consecration, right? Because the doves or the manure would be introduced externally into the consecrated dovecote or manure pile, or dunghill, but a field growing vegetation or a tree producing fruit, those will just happen naturally on this field or on that tree, which had already been consecrated. Now the sages taught. So far we've heard opinions from Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yosef, and Rebbe. Now the majority. The sages taught in the case of cisterns with regard to one who consecrated them when they were empty, and they were later filled. If one derives benefit from them, he is liable for misuse of consecrated property, but he is not liable for misuse of consecrated property if he derives benefit from their contents. Seems to agree with Rabbi Yehuda for sure, and Rabbi Yosef as far as cisterns and dunghills are concerned, per the analysis of Rebbe. This ruling will be clarified below. Now, here's a contrary opinion that Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, says, one is liable for misuse of consecrated property even by deriving benefit from their contents. Interesting. So Rabbi Lazar is saying that consecration is contagious, so to speak. That if you consecrate a cistern and then you add water to it, and then you use that water, you become liable to bring a sin offering for misuse of consecrated property. A, because you used the cistern, and B, because you made use of the water that was added to a consecrated cistern. Must be that water became consecrated, per the minority opinion of Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon. The sages taught, Rabbah says this dispute in the Baraisa applies only in the cases of a field and a tree. As the first Tana holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosei. So Rabbi Elazar wasn't saying water added to a cistern. He's just saying he agrees with Rabbi Yosei that if you're talking about a field or a tree that naturally produces vegetation or fruit, that would be consecrated and you'd be liable for misuse of consecrated property, but not in the case of the cistern and the dunghill. And in the cases of the cistern and a dovecote, everyone agrees that if one derives benefit from them, he is liable for misuse of consecrated property, but he is not liable for misuse of the consecrated property if he derives benefit from their contents. Seems like everyone agrees that if you consecrate the dovecote or the cistern, and by extension the dunghill, and then later you add contents, the contents do not become consecrated. Abaye said to Rabbah, but consider that which is taught in the continuation of the Baraisa. If one consecrated them when they were full, and then derives benefit from them or from their contents, he is liable for misuse of consecrated property, because what was in them was consecrated at the time they were consecrated. And Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, reverses his previous ruling in this case, and holds that if the items were consecrated when full, their contents are not subject to the prohibition against misuse of consecrated property. Oh, sounds like Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, actually is going all the way in a different direction. It seemed like everyone agreed that if you consecrate a dovecote with doves in it, both the dovecote and the doves are consecrated. But now Rabbi Elazar is saying, no, the dovecote is consecrated. The doves who happen to be in there are not. Now we're on page 79b. And if their dispute is referring to a field and a tree, why does Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, reverse his opinion? Rather, Rabbah's statement must be adjusted. And this is what Rabbah said. This dispute between the first Tana and Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, applies only in the cases of a cistern and a dovecote. But in the cases of a field and a tree, everyone agrees that one is liable for misuse of consecrated property if one derives benefit from them or their contents. So the Gemara asks, and in the cases of a cistern and a dovecote, where the cistern and the dovecote are empty, with regard to what matter do they disagree? And similarly, where the cistern and the dovecote are full, with regard to what do they disagree? And the Gemara answers, in the cases of a cistern and a dovecote that are empty, they disagree with regard to the matter that is the subject of the dispute between Rabbi Meir and the rabbis. New dispute coming down. What's the dispute between Rabbi Meir and the rabbis? The first Tana and Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, disagree. Because the first Tana holds in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis, who disagree with Rabbi Meir. And the rabbis say, a person cannot transfer ownership of an object that has not yet come into the world, i.e., that one does not currently own because it does not yet exist. Like this fruit that hasn't grown on the tree yet, hasn't even budded yet. Maybe we can expect that this tree will produce fruit next year. But there's no fruit on that tree now. Can I sell you the fruit that's on that tree? I could give you a right to come harvest from this tree year after year, but can I sell you the fruit that will be on this tree that does not yet exist? The rabbis say, no, a person cannot transfer ownership of an object that does not yet exist, that has not yet come into the world, i.e. that one does not currently own. He can't sell it because he doesn't own it. Therefore, one cannot consecrate water or doves that will enter the cistern or dovecote only in the future. And Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who says a person can transfer ownership of an object that has not yet come into the world. And the Gemara raises a difficulty with regard to this analysis. You can say that you heard Rabbi Meir express this opinion in a case such as the fruit of palm trees, which are likely to come into existence as the trees naturally produce fruit. But with regard to these doves and water, who can say that they will ever come to the dovecote or the cistern? Rava said, well, you can find cases where one consecrates water or doves that are likely to arrive. For example, in the case of water that comes by way of his courtyard into the cistern when it rains, so that he does not need to fill the cistern. He can expect that when it rains, water will enter that cistern. And similarly, with regard to doves that come by way of his other full dovecote into this empty dovecote. So the Gemara asks, and in cases where the cistern and the dovecote are full, with regard to what do they disagree? And Rava said this dispute concerns a case where he consecrated a cistern without specification, and Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, holds in accordance with the opinion of his father, who says, one infers the halacha, the law of consecration to the Most High, from the law of transactions between one ordinary person and another. In other words, we can learn out features of the law of consecration from features of the law of buying and selling between regular people. And the Gemara explains, just as the law with regard to transactions between one ordinary person and another is that one can say, I sold you the cistern, but I did not sell you the water that it contains. So too, the law in the case of consecration to the Most High is that one can say, I consecrated the cistern, but I did not consecrate the water within it. And the first Tana holds that one does not infer the law of consecration to the Most High from the law of transactions between ordinary people. Rather, one who consecrates property does so generously, i.e. the most expansive meaning is assumed for his vow of consecration, and therefore, even if he did not say so explicitly, he consecrated the water together with the cistern. Whereas in the law of transactions between ordinary people, if one says, I'm selling you the cistern, unless he explicitly adds, I'm selling you the water in the cistern, we can assume that he only meant to sell the cistern. Now the Gemara asks, and does the law concerning a transaction with an ordinary person say that one does not sell the water along with the cistern? But didn't we learn in the Mishna that one who sold a cistern has sold its water? And Rava said the ruling in the Mishnah is an individual opinion. As it is taught in a Baraisa, one who sold a cistern has not sold its water. And Rabbi Nassan says one who sold a cistern has sold its water. And with that, we conclude our discussion of Mishnah number 4 here in chapter 5. Now we're on page 80a, short page, and we open Mishnah number 5. One who buys the produce of a dovecote from another, i.e. the doves that will hatch over the course of the year in a dovecote. Can we sell things that don't exist yet? But you're not selling something that doesn't exist yet. You're not selling specific doves. You're selling the right to any doves that this dovecote may produce. And the people are taking a chance that it will produce none or that it will produce a lot, etc. So you're selling the right to the doves that emerge from this dovecote, from this brood that are bred within this dovecote. So one who buys the produce of a dovecote from another, i.e. the doves that will hatch over the course of the year in a dovecote, must leave the first pair of doves from the brood for the seller. If one buys the produce of a beehive, i.e. all the bees produced from a beehive over the course of the year, the buyer takes 3 swarms, and then the seller renders the bees impotent so that they will stop producing offspring and instead produce only honey. And one who buys honeycombs must leave 2 combs. If one buys olive trees for felling, he must leave 2 shoots for the seller. In other words, you can't take so much produce, so much property from the seller that you're leaving him without the ability to regenerate his stock and continue, producing bees, producing honey, selling swarms, selling honey, etc. You're not taking everything that his dovecote produces. You're taking the doves beyond what he needs to continue breeding doves. That's the Mishnah. Now the Gemara. The Mishnah teaches that one who buys the brood of a dovecote must leave the first pair of the brood for the seller. And the Gemara asks, but isn't it taught in a baraisa that one must leave the first and the second pairs of a brood for the seller? And Rav Kahana says, this is not difficult. La kasha. This statement in the Mishnah is referring to the pair left for the first pair of the brood itself, i.e. an extra pair of doves must be left behind to ensure that the first brood will not fly away. This is just part of, dove raising. And that statement of the Baraisa is referring to a pair left for the mother of the pair discussed in the Mishnah. In other words, the Baraisa is saying that one must leave a pair of doves for the mother and later a second pair for the brood of her children, which is the pair mentioned by our Mishnah. Now the Gemara asks, what is different from the mother that there is no concern that she will escape from the dovecote? If the reason is that she is attached to her daughter and the mate which one leaves for her, this should also be true with regard to the daughter, i.e. she too will become attached to her mother and the mate which one leaves for her. Why then is it necessary to leave behind a pair of the daughter's own brood to ensure that the daughter will not leave the dovecote? And the Gemara answers, a mother dove is attached to her daughter. It doesn't say dove. It says a mother is attached to her daughter, whereas a daughter is not attached to her mother. Therefore, in order for the daughter to remain in the dovecote, it is necessary to leave the daughter's brood with her. I guess it's the way of birds that the babies fly away. The mother is more apt to stay here. She's made her life here. The baby might stay here, might go find another dovecote to raise her young. The Mishnah teaches that one who buys the produce of a beehive takes 3 swarms and then the seller renders the bees impotent. Right? So there's this idea that you have a beehive. Certain times during the year, they will produce an additional queen, and that queen and a bunch of bees will go and start another beehive somewhere else. And if you're a prolific beekeeper, you can sell swarms of bees to other people who want to be beekeepers on their property. So if you're going to say, I want to buy all your swarms in the coming year, so you can only take a certain number of swarms, lest you make the beekeeper, lose what he needs in order to keep his business going. Sorry, my tzitzis garment is falling out of my sleeve. Okay. So where am I? Right. So again, the Mishnah teaches that one who buys the produce of a beehive takes 3 swarms and then the seller renders the bees impotent. And the Gemara adds, by what means does he render the bees impotent? And Rabbi Yehuda said that Shmuel said he renders them impotent by feeding them mustard seed. In other words, allowing them to collect pollen from mustard plants. And they say in the West, Eretz Yisrael, in the name of Rabbi Yosei Bar Chanina, it is not the mustard itself that renders them impotent. Rather, since their mouths sting from the bitterness of the mustard, they return and eat their own honey. And due to their excessive eating of honey, they cease to form new swarms and instead produce honey for the seller. And Rabbi Yochanan says, this is not the meaning of the word mesaris, used above. Rather, the Mishnah should be understood as follows. One takes 3 swarms by skipping beserus every other swarm, so that the buyer receives the first, third, and 5th swarms, while the others remain with the seller. And it is taught in a baraisa, the buyer takes the first 3 swarms, one after the other, and from this point forward, he takes 1 and leaves 1. Now, the Mishnah teaches that one who buys honeycombs must leave 2 combs, and one who buys olive trees for felling, right, for the lumber, must leave 2 shoots. So Rav Kahana says, as long as honey remains in the beehive, it never leaves its status as food, i.e. it is always considered fit for human consumption. And the Gemara notes, apparently Rav Kahana holds that honey does not require that one have intention to eat it for it to be susceptible to tuma, to ritual impurity, right? So a tree cannot become tameh, cannot become ritually impure. But once you pick an apple off that tree, okay, so now it's produce, and if it comes into contact with a source of tuma, that apple can become tameh, ritually impure. And then somebody who is careful to only eat in a state of ritual purity, that doesn't exist anymore because we're all assumed to be in a state of ritual impurity. But when the Holy Temple was standing and we had the ashes of the red heifer for people to become purified from corpse tuma, so certainly Kohanim had to be in a state of purity before they could eat their teruma, right? So, but something could not become tameh until it is harvested, until it is fit for consumption and ready for consumption. That has nothing to do with cooking, but it does have to be harvested if it's still attached to the ground. Now we said that honey is not produce in the same way, right? It's not vegetation. It doesn't grow from the soil, but we talked about this a few times. Honey from a honeycomb is likened to produce from a field. So what they're saying here is it's not that you have to remove the honey from the honeycomb and then you could say, okay, now it's susceptible to tuma. They're saying even while it's in the honeycomb, it's ready to be eaten. It stands to be eaten, and so could it become if it comes into contact with tuma, can it become tameh? Right. So what does it say? Rav Kahana says as long as honey remains in the beehive, it never leaves its status as food, so it is always considered as fit for human consumption. So apparently Rav Kahana holds that honey does not require that one have intention to eat it for it to be susceptible to tuma. In other words, it can become tameh even while it's in the beehive. Now the Gemara raised an objection from a baraisa. Honey in a beehive is not considered to have the status of either food or liquid with respect to tuma. Abaye said the law that honey is considered neither food nor liquid is necessary only with regard to those two combs mentioned in the Mishna, which are designated for the sustenance of the bees and are not for human consumption. They are set apart. They cannot be eaten by people because they're needed by the bees, right? The beekeeper has set that aside to only be eaten by the bees. And therefore, it should not be able to become tameh because it is not for human consumption. Not because humans couldn't eat it or wouldn't, it's just that it's been set aside from human consumption because the bees need it. Now, Rava said the Baraisa is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Now on page 80b. As we learned in a Mishnah concerning a beehive, Rabbi Eliezer says it is considered like land with regard to the manner in which one purchases it and with regard to other matters. And therefore, one can write a prosbul, right, guaranteeing a debt with a beehive as if it were land and thereby create a legal device that circumvents the cancellation of debts in the sabbatical year. Right? So if you can use a beehive that way, then we're saying that a beehive is like land. And the beehive is not susceptible to tuma, to ritual impurity, provided that it is in its place and attached to the ground, as it is considered equivalent to the ground itself, and the ground and things growing out of the ground are not susceptible to tuma. And one who takes honey out of a beehive on Shabbos is liable to bring a sin offering like one who uproots something from the ground. So according to this opinion, honey in a beehive is not considered to have the status of either food or liquid with regard to tuma, as it is attached to the ground. And this would seemingly contradict Rav Kahana or Rabbi Eliezer, who said that it is subject to tuma while it's in the hive. Now the Mishnah continues, and the rabbis say, a beehive has the status of movable property, not land. One may not write a prosbul based on it, and it is not considered like land with regard to its sale, but it is instead sold in the manner of movable property, and therefore it is susceptible to ritual impurity, to tuma, even when it is in its place, and one who takes honey out of it on Shabbos is exempt from bringing a sin offering, and this is the law. According to this opinion, the honey contained within the beehive is considered detached from the ground and is therefore susceptible to ritual impurity. And one who takes honey from a beehive is not going to be liable to bring a sin offering for harvesting if he takes it on Shabbos, because now it might not be Shabbos stick to stick your hand in a beehive, but it would not violate a Torah law. It might violate a rabbinic decree, but it definitely doesn't violate a Torah law. Now, Rabbi Lazar said, what is the reasoning of Rabbi Eliezer? As it is written with regard to Jonathan in the story of Jonathan and David, he put forth the end of the rod that was in his hand and dipped it in the honeycomb, Ya'arat hadevash. Now, what does a forest have to do with honey? A forest, Ya'ar, have to do with honey, devash. So why is the honeycomb called a forest of honey, Ya'arat hadevash? So rather, this serves to tell you that just as with regard to a forest, one who picks fruit from a tree on Shabbos is liable to bring a sin offering, so too with regard to honey, one who removes honey from the beehive on Shabbos is liable to bring a sin offering, not because he's actually harvesting, but because the Torah seems to draw a connection between removing honey from a beehive to taking something from a forest. And therefore, just through a kind of verbal analogy, the Torah might be implying that we should not be taking honey from a beehive on Shabbos, according to this view. Now, the Gemara raises an objection from a Baraisa. Honey that flows from one's beehive is not considered either food or liquid. Now, granted, according to the reasoning of Abaye, this works out well, since he would explain here, as in the previous case, that this is referring to the two combs in the beehive designated for the sustenance of the bees and was never intended for human consumption. But according to the opinion of Rava, who says that the Baraisa is in accordance with the ruling of Rabbi Eliezer, this presents a difficulty, as even according to Rabbi Eliezer, the honey is not considered attached to the ground once it leaves the beehive. And Rav Zevit said the Baraisa is referring to a case where the honey flowed onto a repulsive vessel, and it became unfit for human consumption because it came into contact with something dirty. Rav Acha Bar Yaakov said it is referring to a case where it flowed onto straw, kashkashin, and weeds, and that would render it inedible. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. The Gemara... The Gemara raises another objection from a Baraisa. Honey in one's beehive is not considered either food or liquid. If one intended to use it as food, it is susceptible to tuma as food. And if one intended to use it as liquid, it is susceptible to tuma as liquid. The laws for something becoming tameh, ritually impure, are different with respect to food than with respect to liquid. Granted, according to the reasoning of Abaye, this works out well, as he can explain that this too is referring to the two combs of honey left for the bees, and that if one reconsidered and decided to eat the honey, it is once again considered fit for human consumption. But according to Rava, who said that the ruling of the Baraisa that honey in a beehive does not have the status of food or liquid is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, well, this poses a difficulty. This Baraisa does not accord with the reasoning of Rabbi Eliezer, as he maintains that one's intention is not enough for honey attached to the ground to be considered as though it were detached. Therefore, the Baraisa must be in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis. And yet, it contradicts Rav Kahana's statement that intention is not required for honey to become susceptible to ritual impurity. This is similar to the idea that when does a vessel become susceptible to tuma? When the craftsman says it's finished. So if he's still working on it, he thinks I got to polish this more and make it really beautiful, so it's not finished and it's not susceptible to tuma. But if he says, you know what, it is done, I'm going to leave it like that, I like that rough look, now it's susceptible to tuma. So his intention matters. And likewise, did you say that this honey is for human consumption or not? Your intention will have some bearing on whether it becomes susceptible to tuma or not. And the Gemara answers, Rava could have said to you that the Baraisa is in fact in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, and you should resolve the difficulty and answer it like this. If one intended to use the honey as food, it is not susceptible to ritual impurity as food. And if one intended to use it as a liquid, it is not susceptible to ritual impurity as liquid. And the Gemara notes, it is taught in a Baraisa in accordance with the opinion of Rav Kahana, honey in one's beehive is susceptible to ritual impurity as food, even if there is no intention to use it as food, as it has the innate status of food. And that is the halacha. That is the law. Okay. Just one question from Sharon. If food not yet harvested cannot become tameh, then wouldn't honey still in the hive and not yet collected for human consumption be treated the same way? And you must have put that in before we reached the end of our discussion today when they said, nope, even in the beehive, it is innately ready to be eaten, and therefore it stands to be eaten, and it can become tameh. And I'm sure Winnie the Pooh would agree that honey in the hive stands to be eaten. That's what I've got for us today, and with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Wednesday at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a good night.